Okay, so we're recording this bed is gonna get messy real quick. I'm not used to sitting on my bed once it's made because I don't like sitting on my bed with my outside clothes, but I also just don't like to mess it up. But I like this as a backdrop for my podcast. For those of you who watched the last episode, you will know that this is a new backdrop, a completely different room from the one that I was recording in last time. And it's because I moved. I am now in Toronto, in Canada, which is crazy. I only moved like a week ago. I'm from London originally. And yeah, I made quite a big move. I'm just out here. But welcome back to another episode of Theory of Everything, episode 3. I'm so proud that I have been like relatively consistent with this. Like I know I haven't posted every week, but I only started this like last month and we're on episode 3. And now that I have moved countries, I quit my job. I'm going to try and be more consistent with this. Not try, I'm going to be more consistent with this and we're going to have weekly episodes going forward. So today I wanted to talk about something else that has been on my mind. And I started to think about this more in the last few days. I've spoken about social media a lot in my previous podcast episodes. It's like constantly a topic of conversation in my life. And so it always comes up. But recently I was thinking about it because, like I've mentioned in my previous episodes, I have taken a step back from social media over the last few months. Well, it's been more than just a few months. It's been like half a year since I've kind of taken a step back. I haven't really been posting as much and I've not really been consuming as much. And that was a concerted effort. I actually downloaded an app to help me limit my social media usage because I was beyond addicted. Yeah, I found it really difficult to be productive and to not just waste my time consuming social media. And so I had to make a bit of a concerted effort. And, you know, at this point, everyone is addicted to social media, but it became a real problem for me because I felt like I wasn't able to be super productive. I always had things that I wanted to do, things that were on my mind, things that needed to be done. And I'm like a really organized person. Like I'll make a list of things to do and I like to plan out my month and my week and my year. And despite doing all of that, I feel like I never achieved anything I wanted to achieve. And in my head, I kind of put that down to the fact that I was constantly on my phone. And a big portion of that time on my phone was me consuming things on social media. So that's why I had to take a step back. But I think I also developed negative association with social media. And that's because over the last few years, there has been this increase in conversations around the impacts of social media and how it can be negative. You know, we've seen a lot of this discussion in the media, whether it's through documentaries or YouTube videos or articles. There's so many YouTube videos that I've watched of people talking about how they've taken a step back from social media and how it's been so beneficial to them in their life and how they're so much more present now and so productive. And by consuming all of that, I think I really did buy into the idea that, okay, maybe it's not such a great thing. But more recently, and by more recently, I mean in the last few days, I was actually considering, is it really all that bad? Has the conversation surrounding social media been completely one-sided? And I actually did think about this when there was this documentary that came out on Netflix a few years ago, and it was, what was it called? I don't remember what it's called and I can't be asked to Google it, but you probably know it because it was pretty big at the time and everyone was talking about it. It shone a very negative light on social media. And that, I think, was kind of like the beginning of this conversation, or at least the peak of the conversation. But even at the time when that came out, I remember thinking, okay, this seems a bit too sensationalized. Like, yeah, there are definitely negative impacts of the increase in internet usage and the increase of social media, but I don't know how helpful it is to solely focus, or not focus, but to solely have a conversation about something and to be so one-sided about it. So that was a very long-winded intro, but those are some thoughts that I've had recently and I kind of want to dive deeper into it. What shall we start with? I guess the best place to start is by discussing the shift in the way that we consume and the way that we use the internet as a whole. I remember when I was younger, the way that the internet was used was vastly different, or not even just the internet, but the way that we interacted with computers and the digital world in general. When I was younger, it felt like more of an escape. In order to use the internet or to use a computer, it wasn't something that's so mobile. You weren't able to just walk around the world and constantly be connected. You'd live your real physical life. And then you'd come home and then you'd go on your computer and you play a few games and you might go onto Facebook and see what everyone's saying. It was more of an escape. It was a way to escape from reality for a bit, but then to also entertain yourself. And there seemed to be like a healthy balance. And so it was more enjoyable because it wasn't something that we were on all the time and it wasn't all consuming. It was a break from reality. And I think because of that constraint, because of the fact that it wasn't so mobile, we didn't actually have mobile phones with internet at the time, we were able to limit ourselves, limit our exposure to the internet and how much we were consuming and using computers or interacting with anything digital. But over the last, I guess, 2 decades maybe, or just under 2 decades, let's say the last 15 years, there's been a shift in the way that we use the internet. Technology has advanced. The advancements in technology have accelerated at an exponential rate. And so now we have mobile phones with us, which we can take everywhere, and we have the internet constantly, and we can communicate with anyone around the world at any point, at any time, within a matter of milliseconds. So yeah, we're constantly connected. We are constantly on our phones. We're able to constantly entertain ourselves. We have the entire internet and the entire digital world, I guess, at our fingertips at all times and at all moments of our life. It goes with us everywhere. And so now it's kind of become the complete opposite, where we sometimes feel a bit overwhelmed by the amount that we're consuming. And instead of taking a break and escaping to the internet, we have to escape away from that. And that's what we've been seeing over the last few years. People are constantly having to do a social media detox or a digital detox, where they're taking a break from all things digital because they find it overwhelming. And I think that's a natural result of constantly consuming and being overloaded by information. But because of this shift in the way that we do consume and the way that we use the internet, there's been an increase in the conversation surrounding the internet as a whole and the impacts of our increased usage. Like I mentioned, there's been so much in the media about this particular topic of conversation, from the Netflix documentaries to YouTube videos. Because of this shift, there's been a noticeable impact on everyone. And with anything, whenever there's a change or there's a new technology, there's always going to be a discussion around it. People are always going to focus on the impacts. There's always going to be a little bit of fear-mongering. Apparently, this is consistent throughout history. When electricity was invented and you had light bulbs everywhere, people were scared of that as well. And there's like a similar thing with the internet. But I think especially because of the largely social element of the internet, the ability to kind of have all of your information out there, but to also consume information and for you to consume misinformation. There's just so much to the internet that makes it a scary place, and for the conversation around it to just naturally be a bit negative, especially when we're discussing the impact and the effects of it. But again, I think, a lot of the discussions are really sensationalized. And I find that this happens a lot on the internet. Whenever there's a trending topic that people are discussing, it's always very one-sided. And then you have this kind of, not really an echo chamber, but it's people like to build on top of things. So whatever the general consensus seems to be, people like to add on to that and kind of fuel the fire. That seems to be what's happened with this conversation. Like, we've all just agreed that, social media is this big bad thing and it's terrible for your mental health and it's something we need to take a step back from and reevaluate. And I really want to focus on maybe discussing both sides of this conversation. So let's begin by discussing the actual negative impacts that are being discussed. There's the very obvious one, and especially if we're talking about social media, there's the impact that social media can have on young people and on young people's body image and on their mental health. And, that stems from constantly consuming one type of content, seeing unrealistic depictions of what people should look like, especially on platforms that are so focused on aesthetic, like Instagram, where people are putting out the best version of themselves. As a young person, constantly consuming that's going to affect your body image. You're going to compare yourself to that. And that therefore leads to impacts on your mental health and your self-esteem. I think that's the biggest thing that we see when we're talking about social media. It's the comparison. There's also, with social media being so algorithmic, there's a sameness to what you consume. You find yourself in an echo chamber because the algorithm begins to pick up on what you like to consume and feeds you the same thing over and over again. So that's also not the greatest, especially when we consider the fact that it's so easy to spread misinformation on the internet. Some people can get locked into a cycle of just consuming conspiracy theories and consuming misinformation. And it's so easy also on social media to present yourself as an authoritative figure. That's also really dangerous. Like, how can you really verify that someone is a certified dermatologist when they're giving you skincare advice? I mean, it sounds legit, right? So there's all of these things. There's the impact that it has on people's mental health. There's misinformation spreading like wildfire. There's, I think, just like general anxiety and stress that stems from consuming constantly, especially because we're kind of consuming information at a rate that we haven't really before. We know everything that's going on around the world, or at least we know more about what's going on around the world at any given moment than we have in comparison to any point in history before. And it's not just knowing about what's going on, it's being updated live in the moment about every single event in the world. And that's a lot of information for anyone to consume and to process. So there's kind of a double-edged sword to it. There's the fact that it's just information overload, and that can be anxiety inducing and stress inducing to a person. But then a lot of what we are consuming is also just negative. I think as humans, we tend to report on negative things, and we also like to be informed about negative things. Like, the news isn't really going to highlight great things or like positive, joyous, optimistic things. That's rarely the case. And so not only are we consuming too much information, but we're also consuming too much negative information about all of the terrible things that are going on around the world. And that's also a product of the internet and social media. So those are all like really terrible things, right? And then, so I didn't even touch on the fact that according to that particular documentary that came out on Netflix, and these were people who had worked at social media companies before, these apps and these platforms have been engineered to be addictive. They're supposed to be like drugs. They're supposed to reward us and release dopamine so that we become addicted to them, and we constantly want to use that so that we get that dopamine rush. And then it kind of becomes this thing where we go to social media to seek validation when we're posting, but then we also use it because we feel like we're being rewarded. When we use social media, we feel that release. It's like, I don't know what it's like to smoke a cigarette because I've never done it, but I imagine that's kind of the same thing. It's like a pacifier. When you're feeling anxious or stressed about anything in real life, it's easy to grab your phone and to block all of that out and use social media because it just makes you feel good. So those are a lot of the effects and a lot of the byproducts of social media and increased internet usage. And then following on from that is the topic surrounding the impact that these have on our mental health. So, you know, it's the impact that it has on our attention span because we're constantly consuming short form content, the impact that it has on anxiety and depression, and whether social media is increasing these things. There's a lot of discussions around the impact it has on our mental health as a whole and as a society, right? But having discussed those things, and those are very real things, and I think things that we should consider when we use social media, I do wonder whether the conversation is one-sided. I don't even wonder that. I know it's a very one-sided conversation because we often discuss those things without bringing to conversation the very positive impacts that the internet and social media has had on us personally as individuals, but then also as a society. And on top of it being one-sided, I think it's also very one-dimensional. We often talk about the internet and the impacts that the internet has on us as a society, but focus only on social media. Like, we often use those things interchangeably. And I've been doing that in this podcast, to be fair, as well. But they're not one and the same. Social media is maybe one aspect of the internet, but then there's so much more to the internet as well that isn't social media. I think the reason why it's important to have this discussion and for it to not be so one-sided is so we don't just develop this negative association and we decide, okay, I think I should stop using the internet and I should stop being on social media because it's terrible for me, which is kind of what I did. So moving on to the impact that this conversation surrounding social media and the internet has had on me, I think for me, having consumed a lot of negative media, you know, again, whether it was a YouTube video or these documentaries, I just developed this negative association with the internet as a whole. And this is going to be a bit of a problematic comparison, but it reminds me a bit of an eating disorder. Okay, I hope that doesn't like offend anyone, that comparison. But what I mean by that is, you know, sometimes when people have an eating disorder, they have negative association with food in general. So like they develop a negative relationship with food. And so everything is considered bad to them. And depending on what type of eating disorder you have, you kind of just don't want to eat at all because every food is considered unhealthy or makes you feel bad about yourself. I became obsessed with tracking my screen time. I downloaded an app called Opal, which helped me track my screen time, limit apps that I was using so that I wasn't going above a certain amount of screen time. Like, I was obsessed with getting my screen time down to like around 1 hour a day or even below 1 hour a day. And on days where my screen time was above that, I felt really bad about myself. I felt like I was kind of stuck in a bad habit. And then on days when I did stick to that, I felt really great about myself. And so I associated my productivity and I guess a bit of my self-worth with how much time I was spending on my phone. And I don't think that's particularly helpful because, like I mentioned before, not all aspects of phone usage or the internet are negative. You can use those things in very productive ways, but I just had this very negative association with my phone and my screen time as a whole. At the time, I was also worried that I was spending such a large portion of my life on my phone and not being present or doing things in real life that I wanted to do. And this is, again, like another very sensationalized thing that I see on the internet. I remember at the time, I'd always see these stats and it was, oh, if you use your phone for 2 hours a day, then you're spending 50 years of your life on your phone. That doesn't actually mathematically make sense, but I'm kind of exaggerating there. But I definitely see a lot of those stats and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to spend 10 years of my life on my phone. That's such a waste of time. And, you know, I wouldn't just see that with phone usage. I see that with a lot of things, to be honest. And I think that points to another topic of conversation, what I think is very toxic productivity, this toxic productive mentality that lives on the internet. And I actually want to discuss that in another podcast episode because it kind of relates to this, but I think that is a thing for sure. But yeah, I just don't think it's very productive, talking about productivity, to calculate how many years you're spending doing a particular thing, because like we sleep for a big portion of our life as well. And that adds up to so many years when you accumulate it over your lifetime. It's not great for your mental health as well, because then you begin to overthink every second of your life that you're spending and whether you're wasting your life. And it also places pressure on yourself to be doing something every moment of your life. And that's kind of the place that I found myself in because of this. I felt, okay, I don't want to use social media as much because I feel like I'm wasting my time, but instead I have to replace that with something that's productive. So I felt this insane amount of pressure to constantly be doing something, to constantly be working on something, to constantly be having fun. And I also don't think that's too healthy either, because it's not realistic for us to always be working. It's not realistic for us to always be having fun. It's not realistic for us to just always be doing something. Like, it's okay to do nothing for a moment. I think a big portion of this conversation surrounding social media, especially a lot of the videos that I watched on YouTube where people were claiming that taking a break from social media has made them so much more productive and helped them become a better person. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think the pendulum can swing too far in the other direction as well. And we need to kind of be wary about that. Recently, I was thinking about the steps that I've taken back from social media. And I was thinking about what impact it's had on my life, whether it's been beneficial, if there's been any like negative side effects to it. And don't get me wrong, by the way, I also don't want to risk this conversation being super one-sided. I don't want to say that we don't need to be mindful about how we use our phone and how we use the internet and how we use social media. But I think we want to be careful about why we're doing that. Again, it comes back to like it being sensationalized. And a key example of this is what social media is compared to. A lot of people compare social media to a drug, especially when we go back to the discussions about it being addictive and it being engineered to be addictive. People refer to social media almost as a drug because it has those addictive qualities. And I think that's a very, again, I don't know how many times I've said this word in this podcast, but it's very sensational. And that's kind of the point that I want to make in this episode. And I think the kind of conclusion that I've come to. So whilst it's great to be mindful, let's also be realistic and not super one-sided, because I think there are positives to social media and there are positives to the internet. And I noticed by taking a step back and by thinking that I was doing something that's really great for me, I actually lost out on a few things. And so I kind of want to go through those as well. So one, for me, social media, especially Instagram, was a creative outlet for me. I've always been someone who's loved photography. And, I didn't really grow up in a super creative environment. I didn't really have anyone that was super creative around me. I didn't go to a school that nurtured creativity in that way. And so for me, Instagram was that outlet. It was that place where I was able to experiment with my photography and being creative and connecting with other like-minded creative people on the internet. And taking a step back from that meant that I wasn't doing that anymore. And I noticed it recently because I don't really take pictures anymore. Before, I was taking pictures for Instagram. And at a point in my life, I viewed that as a bad thing. I felt that I was only creating for other people. And that can be bad if that's your sole intention and you're only creating because you want to receive likes and you're kind of chasing that rush, I guess. But it's also great that we have this outlet. And this kind of brings me on to a positive of social media. We've never once before had a place where people can be creative and make a living out of creativity like we do now. The amount of opportunities that exist because of social media for creatives is insane. You don't have to do a full 9-to-5 job anymore. You can pursue your creative career and you're not necessarily going to be rich, but you can make a living on the internet now. And there's never been a time before where we've had that. And so I think that's definitely like a benefit that's ignored when we have these conversations. But on top of that, if we ignore the creative aspect, because not everyone's a creative, I think for me, my private Instagram account where I have my friends and stuff that follow me, I would post personal moments, things that I was up to. And it was a way for me to almost journal because I've never really been someone to journal by writing. I have more recently, but I never really used to. And I realized recently that this was actually a way for me to process my life. And I think often there's, again, a negative outlook on people posting their life on the internet. And I get that. But I think there's also benefits to it. And it's something that I realized over the past few days. Because the last few months that I've not been using social media, I feel like it's all been a blur. I don't really know what I've been up to. And in a weird way, I think it's because before when I was posting on Instagram, I was almost curating my life. I was romanticizing moments in my life. And that's something we don't really discuss. Like taking a photo because you want to romanticize your life. Is that a bad thing? I don't actually think it was because I have fond memories and moments of holidays that I've been on before and things that I did because of the pictures that I took and the pictures that I shared with my friends and my family. And I thought that was really interesting because I never really thought about it that way. People's Instagram can be their photo journal and that doesn't have to be a bad thing because again, I think it is something that's almost shamed, sharing your life on the internet. And then there's also this growing culture of shaming people for documenting their life and documenting moments. I always see these videos on social media where there's someone, this is so ironic because it's someone recording everyone else or recording a concert or recording some sort of moment that's going on in real life. And it's that person shaming everyone else for not being present. But like, again, it's so stupid and ironic because you also are recording everyone else and you're not being present in the moment as well. And you're not enjoying the concert. You're like shaming everyone else. Or sometimes it's not even someone that's at the concert. It's someone that's seen the video and they see the amount of phones recording and they decide to comment on the video and shame everyone for recording. But then like you're not being present right now because you're using social media and you're consuming. So yeah, it's very stupid. And those videos do annoy me sometimes. And I get it. We should be present. But like, why does documenting things and taking a picture mean that we're not being present? This idea that because I'm looking at my screen that I'm not present, is that even really true? Because I'm still taking in the moment around me. Yeah, I might be looking through my phone screen, but that doesn't mean I'm not being present. So again, it speaks to this negative association that we have all kind of built and developed around phones and the internet and social media as a whole, that we don't even question the logic to these arguments. I don't know if I'm making sense right now, but what I'm trying to say is I felt like I wasn't being present because I was taking a picture. And I physically felt like, oh, if I'm looking at my phone and I'm taking a picture and I'm still seeing the world around me, like I'm not present right now, which doesn't actually make sense because, well, like, what does it even mean to be present, right? Like I'm taking in the moment. Yeah, I don't know if anything I'm saying right now is making sense, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say. So I've discussed the impact taking a step back from social media has had on me. And I think it's also really great to share this perspective because everyone that has made a video of them taking a step back from social media, it's always been super, oh my God, I'm like spiritually awakened now, and I'm enlightened, and I found the secret to the universe, and I'm so productive now. And I kind of did buy into that, but it's honestly not even super true. Like, you don't need to take a step back from social media. The world we live in now is social media driven. It's how we connect with people. It's how we keep in touch with our loved ones and our friends. And I honestly think sometimes we fall into a trap of convincing ourselves about something and it not actually being real. And don't get me wrong, again, I don't want to risk this conversation being super one-sided. Yes, social media can be a distraction. I think, though, the key is to put things in place so that we are being responsible. And that's what the key is. It's kind of like if we were to say, oh, I don't want to watch TV anymore because it's a complete waste of time. Well, now you're kind of giving up something which has some value in your life. Like, there's entertainment value there. I think it's really negative when we completely slate something as not valuable just because it isn't productive. Like, things have value beyond productivity. Watching movies and watching TV shows are entertaining, and being entertained is okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with being entertained. And the same goes for being on the internet and using social media. There's so much value that we get from using the internet. Like, I can't even summarize it in one sentence, but I'm going to try actually, because I want to discuss a lot of the great things that we do get that we might overlook when we're having these conversations. So I guess the first thing I want to say is, and I mentioned this before, social media is just one aspect of the internet. There's so much more to it as well. So let's just get that out of the way before I go into everything. But one, the internet and social media is a place where we get to connect over our hobbies and our interests. A lot of the time, people have really niche interests, and it's hard to find people in real life that are interested in some of the niche interests that we have. But on social media, the world feels so much smaller. And I guess the positive effect of the algorithm is the fact that it allows us to find people with the same interests. It allows us to find creators and curators and influencers, normal people who share the same interests, the same niche interests as us. And so in a way, it allows us to make more friends than we would have been able to before. I think a lot of people, do struggle, especially in your older years, to make friends and to connect with people. But the internet makes it a much easier place to do that. That being said, I think it sometimes seems, this is a bit of a tangent that I want to touch on because I've just moved to a new country, and this is something that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to use the internet to find new friends and find people that have similar interests and hobbies as me. It's actually harder than it seems. I think I overestimated how easy it would be to find friends with similar interests on the internet, because I was like, oh, there's so many apps out there and whatever, but it's also not that easy. A bit of a tangent, which kind of defeats the point that I'm trying to make, but also doesn't really. So I spoke about connecting with people over hobbies and interests, but the internet is also a place where you can find new hobbies and find new interests and learn new things and find communities that you didn't even know existed before. And it also allows us to find similarities with people at different parts of the world, or even like the same part of the world that we just thought were completely different to us. Something that I'm always astonished by when I'm on Instagram is when I see someone that I follow has liked a specific post, and I'm like, oh, you're interested in that too? It makes me realize the vast amount of interests that people do have. And sometimes I feel like I have nothing in common with a person and they're completely different to me. But then I'm like, oh, there's actually this very specific thing that we're both interested in, or this specific type of humor that we both find funny. And I think that's also really cool. A very obvious benefit from social media is, and I discussed this before, or I mentioned this before, but it's being able to keep in contact with our friends and family, and particularly friends and family all over the world. And again, this is something that I can relate to because I've now moved countries and all of my friends and my family are in London. And if it weren't for social media, I would feel completely alone. But I still have the ability to talk to them whenever I want, or to see what they're up to, or to FaceTime them. And like, that's great, right? Who'd argue that that isn't? Sometimes I romanticize the idea of a world without the internet because I'm like, oh my God, it would feel so great to not care or to be completely disconnected. And I think that's kind of the thing that we all tend to do. We romanticize what we don't have. It's, the grass being greener on the other side. So we kind of just assume that life would be so much better if we didn't have this thing here. And I definitely do think that sometimes. I think, especially when I'm using the internet a lot, just want to take a break sometimes. And I think maybe that is a big part of why people develop a negative relationship with the internet, because they want to escape. And this goes back to what I was mentioning at the beginning, the kind of shift. A large portion of our lives are so digital. And again, people want to escape from their lives. So we romanticize the idea of not having any digital presence or a digital footprint. But I think it's healthy to realize that actually it's not such a bad thing. There's so many benefits and so many great things that come from it. Don't idealize and romanticize this idea of something that isn't actually going to be beneficial to you, because I did try that thing of taking a step back from the internet, and life just goes on. All of your problems don't go away. You're still going to find ways to distract yourself. But then I think it's just easy to have something to blame. And again, I want to reiterate that yes, social media and the internet, there are definitely negative drawbacks to it. It can be a distraction. It can be very addictive. Everything's about control. Everything's about moderation. Social media and the internet in moderation is actually so powerful. It's such a powerful tool. And I didn't even touch on the fact that there's so many new business opportunities and like financial opportunities that exist now because of the internet. People can set up businesses in their entire life and make a living because of the internet. And that's overlooked in this discussion. So yeah, I'm just going to leave this conversation there. I feel like I've touched on everything. I'm sorry if this episode was very rambly. I feel like this one was particularly rambly in comparison to previous ones and was a bit all over the place, but we move. So to finish off, I guess my final thought would be, don't paint the entire internet and social media as this negative, bad thing. Realize that actually it can be a very powerful, transformative and great thing in moderation. And if you're someone who feels like maybe you're addicted to your phone and it's taking over, then just allow yourself to take a step back. But don't paint the entire thing in this negative light, because it's not. Yeah, let me know what you think about everything I've discussed today. I think this episode definitely takes the trophy for me overthinking a conversation or a topic that doesn't need to be overthought. I don't know. I hope you did enjoy this episode though. Even if it was super rambly, I hope you could take something away from it and it was entertaining at least. And if you did enjoy this episode, make sure to follow this podcast on whatever platform that you listen to podcasts on, or you can subscribe on YouTube if you prefer video podcasts. And yeah, leave a thumbs up or give me a good rating if you enjoyed. Also leave a comment, again, letting me know what you think. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. My vocal cord is tired, so I need to go.